From our Toronto studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Zahra Syed. Our top story tonight. Israeli airstrikes have killed 83 Palestinians and wounded 142 others in Gaza, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Officials say at least 20 people have died in hospitals from malnutrition and dehydration in recent days. Media outlets report that the starvation crisis in Gaza worsens, with more and more malnourished children arriving at depleted hospitals in a desperate search for help. Overnight, 35 people were killed when Israeli forces targeted homes in Nuseirat refugee camp and Deir al-Balah. Elsewhere, Al Jazeera reports heavy clashes were heard in Johor al-Dik, south of Gaza City, an area in which Israeli troops have been stationed since the start of the ground invasion in late October. The Israeli military confirms targeting Hamas fighters in Khan Yunis, resulting in 6 deaths, with additional casualties reported across central Gaza. An Israeli soldier from the Oquetz unit was also killed, while 13 others were injured. The conflict's toll on Israeli forces is also rising, with 587 fatalities and 3,053 injuries recorded since the war began. Israeli authorities returned the bodies of 47 people to Gaza through the Karam Abu Salam crossing, the Palestinian crossing authorities said on Thursday. It was not immediately clear whether the bodies belonged to Palestinians killed or exhumed by Israeli forces during the ongoing ground invasion of Gaza. The toll of casualties from Israeli attacks in Gaza since October 7th has now reached 30,800 Palestinian deaths and 72,298 injured. In related news, international NGO Refugees International has blamed Israel for putting severe impediments to humanitarian aid operations in Gaza. An investigation conducted by the organization in January reveals dire conditions with widespread hunger and deteriorating health services after 5 months of war. Its team traveled to Egypt, Jordan, and Israel, where they interviewed key stakeholders in the aid response system. Refugee International's investigative report highlights Israeli policies of obstructing aid, including arbitrary denial of goods, complex approval processes, and attacks on critical infrastructure. Despite international legal mandates and U.S. pressure, it says that Israel's compliance continues to remain insufficient. In January, the International Court of Justice issued a ruling ordering Israel to prevent acts of genocide and facilitate urgent humanitarian assistance in Gaza. Refugees International urges Israel to comply with the World Court's measures, end siege tactics, and allow transparent aid delivery. It is also recommending mutual ceasefire agreements, humanitarian access guarantees, and increased UN involvement to enhance humanitarian coordination and resources for Gaza. Additionally, it is also calling on Egypt to facilitate aid transit. Refugees International is advising the U.S. Congress to address Gaza's food crisis and oversee Israel's adherence to humanitarian law. The UN says a swift investigation is needed to look into reports of Israeli soldiers displaying the undergarments of Palestinian women. Stéphane Dujarric, spokesperson for the UN Secretary General, raised concern about soldiers filming and publishing such videos on social media. He says he has seen some of the reports, describing them as extremely disturbing. The head of the UN Refugee Agency, UNRWA, has accused Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of orchestrating a systematic campaign to dismantle the aid agency. Philippe Lazzarini alleges Israel's deliberate destruction of infrastructure in Gaza. He has highlighted Netanyahu's open opposition to UNRWA's post-war involvement in Gaza. The UN agency's role in providing shelter, food, and services to more than 1 million displaced Palestinians has been described as unparalleled in Gaza's humanitarian response. Lazzarini has also refuted Israeli claims of UNRWA staff involvement in attacks launched by Hamas last October, noting swift action and terminations of staff members accused of siding with Hamas. He also says an independent probe has been launched to address these allegations. Despite these assurances, 16 countries have halted funding to UNRWA, totaling $450 million. This risks the collapse of the UNRWA operations. Lazzarini has emphasized the dire situation in Gaza worsened by Israeli bombings and blockades, as well as its hindering of aid delivery to Palestinians. Aid organizations have warned of preventable loss of lives if funding suspensions persist. The European Union has partially restored funding to the UNRWA. South Africa has requested additional provisional measures and modifications of interim rulings in the genocide case against Israel, citing dire new developments in Gaza. The International Court of Justice, or the ICJ, confirmed the submission, highlighting widespread starvation as a pivotal concern. South Africa emphasized Israel's violation of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide and the court's earlier provisional measures issued in January. This request aims to secure the safety of 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza, particularly more than 1 million children. Despite the removal of immediate risk of death by starvation, South Africa has warned of exponential increase in deaths. It has called for immediate cessation of Israel's military activities and lifting the blockade on Gaza. South Africa has accused Israel of deliberately causing starvation amongst the Palestinian children and obstructing humanitarian aid. The ICJ previously ordered Israel to prevent acts of genocide and facilitate urgent humanitarian assistance in Gaza, but stopped short of a ceasefire mandate. A Palestinian television presenter and journalist was killed in an Israeli air raid on Gaza on Tuesday. This has pushed the death toll of journalists targeted by Israel to 133, officials and state media report. Mohammed Salama, who worked for the Palestinian Al-Aqsa channel, was killed along with his entire family when Israeli warplanes targeted his home in the city of Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. The office accused the Israeli army of killing Palestinian journalists to obliterate the truth. Israel stands accused of genocide at the International Court of Justice. An interim ruling in January ordered Tel Aviv to stop genocidal acts and take measures to guarantee that humanitarian assistance is provided to civilians in Gaza. The Biden administration approves 100 arms sales to Israel. Details come after the break. Stay tuned and we'll be right back. Welcome back. In the 5 months since the start of Israel's war on Gaza, the Biden administration has greenlit more than 100 arms sales to Israel. The approvals have bypassed congressional notifications due to lower dollar amounts. According to the media reports, only 2 military sales to Israel have been made public since the start of the war in October. They are $106 million worth of tank ammunition and $147.5 million worth of components needed to make shells. The sales, including precision-guided munitions and small arms, were disclosed during a classified briefing. Critics, including former Biden administration official Jeremy Conandick, have expressed concern over the unprecedented number of approvals. It implies direct U.S. involvement in the conflict as the country faces scrutiny amid calls from advocates and lawmakers like Senator Bernie Sanders to halt military aid to Israel. Under the Foreign Assistance Act, the U.S. cannot provide aid to a country that prohibits or otherwise restricts the delivery of humanitarian assistance. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said during a Tuesday press briefing, Israeli government ministers have blocked the release of flour and other aid into Gaza. Former President Donald Trump voiced support for Israel's military actions in Gaza, saying Israel must finish the problem. He was referring to Israel's move to eliminate Hamas. Trump said Israel faced a terrible invasion and it would have never happened if he was president. He criticized current President Joe Biden for his handling of the war. Meanwhile, Biden faces criticism from progressive Democrats and Arab Americans for his unwavering support of Israel. Vice President Kamala Harris called for a ceasefire and increased aid to Gaza, condemning the inhumane conditions due to Israel's ongoing war on the region. Despite Biden's recent shift in tone, his administration still intends to provide $14 billion in military aid to Israel. U.S. Army veterans and activists are pushing for a ceasefire in Gaza. They addressed a news conference on Wednesday outside the U.S. Capitol ahead of President Joe Biden's State of Union address today. Josephine Guilbeault, a former U.S. military intelligence officer, said a Holocaust is being replayed. She said it was earlier Hitler, and now it is Benjamin Netanyahu perpetrating it. She also warned that they are watching the unfolding of warfare by the American government that consists of wiping out an entire group of people and killing thousands of women and children. UN experts have expressed deep concern at a British court ruling revoking the citizenship of Shamima Begum. Last month, the UK Court of Appeal dismissed an appeal by 24-year-old Begum who lost her citizenship for joining ISIS in 2015. Dubbed a Daesh bride for having left the UK to marry a member of ISIS, Begum lost the first stage of her appeal in 2021. Begum was 15 at the time of her departure. Experts are asking the UK to take urgent action to provide Begum with assistance and protection. They're calling for her repatriation to the UK and reviewing and reconsidering the citizenship rulings. Under international, European, and UK law, any supposed question of consent or voluntariness or use of force, deception, or coercion is irrelevant where the victim of trafficking is a child, the statement read. The UN experts urged British authorities to ensure Begum's protection. They also urged them to follow the lead of many other governments now repatriating women and children from northeastern Syria. Pakistan's Supreme Court has declared the 1977-78 trial of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the country's first democratically elected prime minister, was not fair. Bhutto was executed in 1979 after a court convicted him for conspiring to eliminate his political rival. Former President Asif Ali Zardari, co-chairman of Pakistan's People's Party, initiated to reopen the case in 2011, seeking advisory from the apex court. The 9-member bench, led by Chief Justice Qazi Faiz Issa, unanimously said Bhutto's conviction did not align with fair trial standards. Although unable to reverse the previous verdict, the court aimed to rectify past mistakes. While Bhutto's execution cannot be overturned, the court acknowledged violations of constitutional rights during the trial. Bhutto's grandson, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, hailed the ruling as historic, advocating to declare the execution a judicial murder. The World Meteorological Organization is warning of the adverse effects of El Nino on global climate despite its weakening trend. There is a 60% likelihood of El Nino persisting from March to May, with an 80% chance of neutral conditions from April to June. The WMO is expecting above normal temperatures globally, causing extreme weather events. Last year was the warmest on the record, with January 2023 breaching the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold outlined in the Paris Agreement. El Nino's effects include increased rainfall in certain areas and dry conditions in others. Although weaker than past events, the current El Nino could trigger extreme weather. That's all from our Toronto studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell icon for the latest updates. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.